You're watching EVH Gear TV, brought to you by The Music Zoo. Shop The Music Zoo, your authorized EVH Gear dealer for all your EVH gear needs. Great selection, quality service, and competitive pricing. The Music Zoo is your one-stop shop for all things EVH. Official Van Halen merchandise for EVH Gear TV is provided by VanHalenStore.com. Now, here's your host from Ontario, Canada, EVH Gear artist Eric Broadbent.
Hey everyone, happy Friday and welcome to EVH Gear TV. Really excited to bring this show to you tonight. I've been talking about this one for a very long time. It feels like about 6-8 months I've been talking about this one, joined by author and friend Greg Renoff, author of an incredible book, Van Halen Rising. Greg, how you doing, man?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. The pleasure is all of every EVH Gear TV fan here as well. Really excited about this one. Cannot put this book down. It's like the Holy Grail. It's a definitive Bible when it comes to Van Halen. Dare I say Bible? I don't know if I would get flamed for that, but it is everything Van Halen in a nice bound book. Love it. We got a bunch of people joining us already. We're going to be talking about, I basically said this is going to be a 90-minute Van Halen factoid, geek fest. You want to know the facts, you're going to get the facts. A bunch of people, I'm going to jump and say hi to them real quick. Got 25 people watching. The numbers are climbing as I speak. Poison Ivy Gross here is joining us. That's my better half. Still bowling for dollars. Vinny Romano, Keith Pass, Quentin James, Gabe Granado, Michael Bishop, Bane Rocks is my little man who loves the book. Gary Davlin, Mr. BHB Jr., Carlo Santin, Quentin James, Ty Price, Frank C., and Rob Ashby. I'll come back to you guys in a little bit. We're going to be taking breaks quite often here to say hi to everybody, Rocamp and Frank C. I'm going to try to highlight that there. So the way I was talking about this with Greg off the air, and I tell this to a lot of people as well, too. When you think you know a lot about Van Halen, I don't think I know a lot about Van Halen. I know some of I know a fair amount about Van Halen. I don't know a lot. I don't know it all by any means. No one knows it all. And Greg and I have a mutual friend, a very, very, very good friend. We know him as Scott Gilbert over in Port Huron, Michigan. He also goes by Voodoo for the people in all the forums and things like that. And he's one of the guys, I think, I put him on a pedestal of the all-knowing burritos when it comes to Van Halen. But even Scott doesn't know it all. So when you think you know it all, then you read this book. And I think Van Halen Rising, to me, as a fan, it's like discovering Van Halen for the first time. Take what you know about Van Halen now, and it's erased and thrown out the window, and now you're starting over. So let's kind of talk a little bit about, number one, collecting some of these facts, what the book means to you, and maybe tell us a little bit about, like, wow, like people are really accepting this book. So tell us a little bit about the story of it.
You know, first, thanks for that very nice introduction, and I'm glad people are joining us on the chat there, and we're going to get some questions from them. I know that's going to be cool. For me, the book, as I was saying to you before we started, it was my way I thought I could contribute to the world of Van Halen as a fan. As I was saying, I can muddle around a little bit like guitar, but I can't play like you and a lot of the people who you interact with on a normal basis. I can't do that. And so my interest when I started working on this book was to figure out how Van Halen became Van Halen. And then as I got deeper and deeper into it, I sort of began to realize that, let's face it, the guys in the band are getting older. Dave is the only one who's written a book. It doesn't seem like the other guys, I don't know for sure, but have a driving interest to do a rock bio of their own. They've never worked with another author, and they didn't work with me, but they didn't. In other words, they've never seemed to be particularly interested in trying to get their history down on paper.
Right.
And that's where I sort of felt compelled to say, okay, I'm a historian. I went to school for this. I'm trained to do this. This is what I do. I taught history for years. I can do this and put this story together. It's not meant to be the last word on Van Halen. No. I hope other people will write Van Halen books, but it was my way of thinking that, okay, there's this period of time that I want to know more about as a fan. I don't know a lot about the pre-fame years. I know bits and pieces. I knew basically what everyone else knew, which was, we can go through it all, the backyard parties, so the Starwood, Gene Simmons, Ted Templeman, all the sort of the basic, the landmarks that we all knew about. But as I started to get into the weeds with this and really dig around, I realized, wow, this was a really big and compelling story. And at some point, I started to realize that if I didn't write this book, probably nobody else would. Now, maybe someone else will write a book on Van Halen on the early days, and I would welcome, again, people should write their books and tell their Van Halen stories. But I sort of felt like compelled to do it. And so that's where the drive to interview all these individuals, go through the newspapers, get the flyers, just do everything I could to try to reconstruct the beginnings and the rise of Van Halen out of the backyards Pasadena to worldwide fame. That's where that really started, was just me thinking, I want to know this, and I think I can write this book.
Fantastic. Well, the nice thing is it is reconstructing. It's like going back and putting everything back in the puzzle. You've got the pieces. Now you just got to figure out which one goes in what order. And it's very, very cool. And, one of the things on this show is I always give credit to when I learn something, I pass it on right away. And I pass this tip on, and it's come from your book. And I'm going to allude to this in a second. One of the things I love about your book, and we talk a lot about on the show about Eddie Van Halen's guitar playing, obviously. Now, one of the things we talk about on the show, when I say we, the fans and everyone here, everyone that's a part of the show, we say how good Eddie Van Halen is as a guitar player, as a lead player, but we also say, he's very underrated when it comes to his rhythm playing. Mm-hmm. And so I've said this, and this comes from your book, and I'm not going to take credit for it other than the book. I talk about the swing of Van Halen. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things it kind of alludes to in the book, and other things are direct facts from the book, but I think the secret to the Van Halen swing, there is a trifecta when it comes to that. The trifecta, the three things with that is, number one, their father being a seasoned professional musician. Yep. Number two, what you talk about in the book, is the fact how, let's go back one step. Eddie and Alex playing forever together, whether they had a bass player or not, they wake up, they'd play, they'd take a break for lunch, they'd go back and play together again. So there's no bass player to fill in those holes. So Eddie's got to think like a rhythm player, lead player, bass player. Number three, quote from the book, David Lee Roth's influence with his soul R&B, his wardrobe, all that stuff that he brought to the band. You mix all that up in a nice big blender, and you got some R&B and swing, and that in turn leads to a guitar player who can do all of that. Mm-hmm. You agree with that?
Yeah, and I think the thing I would add to that is one of the things that I remember Templeman said to me when I talked to him for the book was that he said Eddie was like a metronome. He said, if you listen to the breakdown to Feel Your Love Tonight, he would just say, listen to that. He was telling me boom, boom, boom. It's just an absolute, his time was so good. He said he was always on the money with the timing for all the songs. And I agree. And I think one of the things too about Roth, to kind of use that as a jumping off point, is that Roth found the things in what Eddie and Alex did musically at the time that he could work with and built off that. And I think that's really where Van Halen comes from. One of the fun things about the book was sort of hearing about their early experiments and them seeing, having seen Dave's Red Ball Jet and kind of knowing, well, we're really not too hip to some of the stuff that Dave wants to do musically, but Dave and Eddie and Alex and Mike eventually finding the things that all sort of work together. And Dave had that like you said, that black R&B feel to it, and he did not want it to be, I would say like he talked about, he didn't want it to be like a Deep Purple-esque heavy metal where it's sort of like this very static time signature. He wanted it to really breathe, right? He wanted it to breathe, and he wanted it to swing. And I think that's where you can hear, I'm the One is obviously the classic example of that, where Dave really, the way he sings that, the way he brings the vibe to that, the attitude, that's part of the Van Halen, the sound there. And that's, of course, that's Dave's hearing them do Parchment Farm. Mm-hmm. Cactus in the backyards, hear them do 10 years after I'm going home, hearing that sort of that boogie and sort of saying, yeah, I like this type of this feel that comes out of black blues, and Dave kind of understanding what that was and then running with it in his own way to help build those songs. Yeah.
That's right. And the really cool thing I liked about too in the book is the fact that not only, first of all, everyone has a preference. There's the Dave fans, there's the Sammy fans, and there's Gary fans, and there's everything in between. Now, I'm a Dave fan. I love Sammy too, but Dave is my guy if I had to pick one. I love them both. I love Gary too. Nothing wrong by saying that. But Dave, I think we really need to give a kind of and even if you're not a Dave fan, people out there, I think we owe him a huge amount of respect. Number one, Van Halen wouldn't be what they are today if it wasn't for him. The fact what he did even outside of the band. Look at the book. Let's nod to the book where they're doing these parties, and there's parts of the LA where they just people the whites did not go over here to the Hispanics didn't go over here where the blacks were, and things like that. And the cops would show up to these parties and bus parties, and there's a mix of people that never mixed before, and it's like, what are you guys doing here? You're not supposed to be here. The music of Van Halen, and a lot of it because of David Lee Roth, with the influences he had. I mean, he wanted to be anything other than a white man. I think really from what I gathered from the book.
That's like the truest thing anyone's ever said about David Lee Roth. I mean, that's yeah. I mean, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and the cops are almost like, I mean, I think David Lee Roth for president. Maybe we might. I don't know. I'm not going to get into politics. I'm not getting into politics. But you know what? What he did for that scene at that time. No wonder these guys had a following. I mean, he pissed the cops off, and the cops loved him at the same time. The cops probably wanted to be him, and they hated him because their girlfriends and wives probably loved him. At the same time too. But I think we have to give a huge nod to David Lee Roth for not only bringing some swing to that band, getting them gigs that they would have not have got before because they tried. And that's something we'll get into later on too. People think it was so easy for Van Halen to get a gig because they're Van Halen. They're turned down more often than they got a gig. How do you think it would be fair today if they tried today? It was new band today, and they're hitting the scene today with a couple record labels. How would it be different today?
I think the challenge today is that in some ways to break out, in some ways it's actually, I think, a lot more difficult than it maybe even was back in the 70s, because there's so many bands. It's so hard. I mean, one thing was about the 70s and the 60s and the 50s, even the 80s and the 90s, was that ultimately there were record labels, and everyone sort of had to try to get a record deal. And if you knew you had a record deal, you had at least a reasonable
shot.
The best shot you were going to get of having your music heard by a wide audience. Whereas today, there's so many bands, I can't possibly keep up with them. Whereas, for better or for worse, back in high school, you had your Columbia record house that told you there's 20 albums you need to choose from, and these were the ones you needed to choose from. I didn't necessarily, at the time, I wasn't going to record stores digging through vinyl to find these indie releases. And so, I think that it's the challenge. I mean, look, there's amazing, as we all know, I'm a big fan of Guitar World magazine. I find these guitar players all the time that I've never heard of before. These guys, I'm like, wow, this guy's on YouTube. And so that's the challenge. But I think the thing about Van Halen was, if nothing else, we should talk more about Roth, but Eddie's talent was so undeniable to people who knew guitar, to people who really knew phenomenal guitar playing. And one of my very good friends is a guy named Michael, who I got to know through this book. I quote him in the book a couple of times, and he saw Van Halen at the Starwood in 1976, and he was a guy who was Alan Holdsworth, Jeff Beck. I mean, he was a guy who worshipped incredible guitar playing, particularly fusion. And when he heard Eddie in the Starwood, he was just like, this guy's unbelievable. I can't believe how great this guy is. And so from Michael, my friend, and down the line, as Eddie's profile went higher and higher in LA, really when it starts to get on the Sunset Strip, people really saw that. People who understood what great guitar playing was. And then we get to Ted Templeman, who was basically of the opinion that no matter what else about this band, the guitar player, I've got to have this band because of the guitar player. The other pieces, there are positives, negatives, right? Whatever, right? The songs, whatever. I want this band because this guitar player, because there's a tremendous amount of talent in this band, but the guitar player is like, this is unbelievable. And then Roth. Let me give again more props to Dave. Dave was a guy who had this incredible talent, as you mentioned. The incident you're talking about, the Red Ball Jet Party, is a phenomenal anecdote that was told to me by one of Roth's friends, who still lives up in Altadena.
Nice.
And was friends with Roth in high school and in middle school. And he just talked about how, like, and this guy's name is George Perez. Mm-hmm. And he told me the story, and he's like, it was crazy, And imagine, I'm talking to him on the phone, and George is obviously of Hispanic descent, and he's got the accent and everything. He's telling me the story, and he's like, putting the act, he's talking about the cholos, and he's like, he's going through the whole street, he's telling the story, and he was like, it was unbelievable. It's like Dave's talking Spanish to these guys, and like all these white kids are there from, who don't necessarily. He's like, it was crazy. He said, but that was what Dave had, was this ability to sort of bring people together. And then as the years go on, we get to 76, 75, they're playing at biker bars. And for better or for worse, Dave found a way to make that environment his own as well. Dangerous, we know Walter Mitty's and all these places were dangerous and rough, and they were playing in front of really crowds that would Alex said in one interview, like, put a chain around your neck if they didn't like the song, basically after the show, if you didn't play the right songs. And so the fact that those guys with Dave as their mouthpiece and their front man to be able to go into, from the surfers to the beach down at Seal Beach, Golden West Ballroom, lots of surfers, to bikers, to kids in Pasadena, all over the city, Valley kids up at the Rock Corporation. That's to Dave's credit, really kind of leading the charge. And all those guys worked right there alongside him, obviously slogging it out through those years. But Roth had that special, as we know, that special ability, which, look, made him a superstar. That's what made him an absolute superstar in the years that followed.
Exactly. I will gladly, any day of the week, take a singer that doesn't have the vocal range but can take the rest of that. To be honestly, that makes up for a vocal inability. The fact that you can be the ringleader. And I've seen a couple bands in my time, and this isn't Van Halen referring to, there's some other bands, much smaller bands, but I like when I see a lead singer that I kind of alluded to, where they take an invisible lasso, they throw it out, and they lasso the crowd, and they don't let it go until the singer says, okay, now I'm done with you. And David Lee Roth can do that. Whether you're into the band, whether the band's having a good night or bad night, David Lee Roth, and Sammy too, but we're talking about Dave at this point. David Lee Roth can captivate that audience and hold them right there, and then finally say, okay, band, take over. And I love that about the guy. You know what I mean?
The guitar player that a lot of people who are listening will probably recognize the name and know his playing is Tracy G. Of Dio. Did Angry Machines records, was with Dio in the 90s. I was lucky enough to get introduced to Tracy, and Tracy, as I talk about in the book, Tracy did two very, very long interviews with me. And Tracy was a guy who never drank, never really took drugs, never was, he was always a pretty straight guy, and had these moments where he basically was struck by lightning when he first saw Eddie, and talked about, he said, remember, he would go see Eddie and Van Halen continually. Every time he could get a ride to a club, he would go. And he was young, so he would go to these clubs, where all ages shows. And he talked about how, ultimately he's like, yeah, whatever. It was just like, yeah, so Dave's singing, but he's like, the chicks are going crazy and he's doing his thing. And it didn't matter in the club, in the club situation. It didn't matter because the vibe was so good and Dave was so good with the people that ultimately whatever issues that came up later when you have to record a record and these other things where it's suddenly like, okay, now you have to sing in a different sort of way and it's really going to matter more how you sing. It didn't, Tracy was like, who gives? He didn't give a shit. He's like, the guitar player is unbelievable, and you got this lead singer who is making the crowd eat out of his hand. So he saw that, and I'd urge all you guys. Maybe hit up Tracy, buy his CDs, talk to him. He's a great guy, and he is a guy who became who he was. I think he would tell you in large part because he saw Van Halen, and it so put the hooks into him to be a guitar player and to be a rock star. So yeah, phenomenal story. And any band will tell you this as well too. And I'll speak for myself, coming from bands. In the moment is a different thing. And now back in the day, the bands didn't record themselves like they do today. They wouldn't have the equipment to do like we do today. Now you can record yourself with an iPhone or a GoPro or whatever, or professional, HD stuff, whatever. But I mean, you watch back performances of recent, and people, you might think you have a bummer night, and your singer was off, and the guitar player is off. You watch this video back, you're kind of like, oh, it wasn't as bad as I thought, or whatever. Because in the moment, no one cares. No one cares at all. As long as they're having fun, you're playing, good up-tempo music. Exactly. That's exactly right. I mean, that's exactly right. And that's what Tracy was trying to get across, was that the band was so awesome that any sort of things you would pick out if you were trying to think about them as a recording artist, it didn't matter. It didn't make any difference at the time. That's right. And something I'd like to just give, obviously I want a lot of people to check out this book if they haven't checked out the book. And there's so many facts in this book. But one of the cool things I like about it, it's almost like a wake-up call for the younger musicians of today. So today, our younger bands go out there, and the thing that they'll complain about is like, wow, man, the club doesn't have Wi-Fi. Like, well, I can't even get my Instagram pics up on Wi-Fi here. Meanwhile, in the book, you talk about these rough bars. Van Halen would have to bring their amplifiers up an extra 10 feet on the stage, or a few feet on the stage, because maybe the night before there was a gunfight, they needed to hide behind their amplifiers. You want to talk about problems? Let's talk about the problems they had back in the day, and that's some of the things you're going to get in the book. I some of your listeners might know a guy named Tom Broderick. He was Eddie's sound guy, and was a guy who was with those guys for years, and he was actually on the road with them for part of the 1978 tour. His family, basically, the Broderick family, grew up with the Van Halens. And he later, he was a drummer, and he later was playing at Walter Mitty's. So at some point, he was gigging there too with his band, and he talked about how he was in the parking lot and there was a gunshot, and he's like, they're laying down under the car, basically, with broken glass all around them at Walter Mitty's out there, and his vocalist looks over at him and goes, "This is a great place, isn't it?" Or something like, "What a nice place we're playing at." I mean, that was the type of place it was. It was a very rough place. But yeah, look, and the other thing too, I think that I got out of writing this book is that when you play live that much, you get to be great. And if you're a mediocre musician, you're going to get good. And if you're a great musician, you're going to get to be phenomenal. They played so much, and a lot of those guys did. I mean, look at Rusty Anderson, who was in a band called Eulogies, now with Paul McCartney, George Lynch, Randy Rhoads. We could go down the Tommy Gervin, who plays now with Eddie Money. He was in a band called Smile. These guys all got to be pro-level, top-flight guitar players because they played all the time. They were out there. They weren't, again, they weren't playing in their bedroom. And again, I'm not knocking bedroom playing, but I'm saying they were out there in a live situation with a band playing, and that's how they got to be so good at what they did. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the thing is about they talk about the 10,000 hours of practice you need to get great at something. I mean, those guys did it. Those guys did it. And so by playing so much, that to me was a big explanation for why they were able to take on Black Sabbath, take on Boston, take on all these bands,
blow them away,
blow these bands off the stage and shock everybody, basically, to be like, what the hell's going on here? How is this happening? Well, if you've, like I said in the book, if you've been playing Backyard Party since 1971, in one form or the other, if you're Dave, and in some form or another, they were playing in front of people, whether it's at a blacktop basketball court at Hamilton Park in Pasadena, or they're playing a huge Backyard Party a couple of years later with 1,000 kids there. They gigged for years, and that's why you have this, like, people are like, oh, this band is so amazing live. They're such a great band because they played so much. So yeah, to get back to the original point, yeah, they weren't worried about whether there was amenities at the place. These places were dumps. I mean, they were,
that's right.
They were places where you get stabbed again in the parking lot after the show.
That's right. And even if they got turned away from a gig, the cool thing about that, sure, it would be a little punch to the jaw and they dust themselves off. But what did they do? Instead of moping around about it, they went and made their own gigs. And it's really cool. Dave Lee Roth would say, and here again too in the book, and I won't quote it because I don't have the exact words, but Dave Lee Roth would say he wanted to make those club stages basically like the bowls. And now when he plays, or like the backyard parties, I should say, like the bowls, and then now when they play the big bowls and the sheds and all that on the major world tours, he wants to make it like the backyard parties again. He wants to bring it back to where it was. Yeah.
Look, that's the thing too about what was going on with the Red Ball. It's one of my favorite chapters to write. Maybe my most favorite chapter to write was Red Ball Jet. Okay, and so for people who haven't read the book, if you're going to read the book and read part of the book, you just want to pick it up and. The part of the book I would say to read, even though it doesn't seem like a first impulse, is read the chapter about Red Ball Jet, because that was Dave's first band, and basically all of the things that eventually became part of Van Halen in many ways. I mean, not all of them, but many of them, Dave first latched onto early on in Red Ball Jet. I'll give you a perfect example. The backyard parties and the staging. Red Ball Jet began to rent these little, basically these like 6-inch pop-up stages that you would put in a backyard to basically have a little elevation there. You'd get some lights from the lighting place, or you'd steal some lights and you'd paste them up and have a light show or whatever it was. This sort of stuff that started early. But the other thing is that there's this great story in the book that was told to me by the guys in Red Ball Jet, 3 of the guys I interviewed in the book, who said that they had finally gotten an audition at Gazzari's. This is before Van Halen plays Gazzari's. So this is 1972 or so. I can't remember exactly when. Right. And so this is a big deal because Dave really wants to get on the Sunset Strip. He wants to get these guys on the Strip. And so at the time, again, unsigned bands could play at Gazzari. So, amateur bands are trying to become professionals, but they're not recording artists. So they go and they try to do this routine there. It doesn't work. They had this dance. They had these steps basically down. The guys were in the background to do these steps, and all the other guys on the band scene knew that Red Ball Jet was going to do stuff like this, and just in general, I thought this was kooky. They're like, "What are you doing?" We like the Van Halens put the cigarette in their mouth, put on the flannel shirt and the jeans, turn on the Marshall, crank up the Les Paul, and play. That was the deal. And so they thought it was, everyone, this is weird. What this is strange. You're not on the Ed Sullivan Show.
That's right.
Fast forward, 1984. What do you see in the middle of a Hot for Teacher video?
Totally.
You see Dave and the guys doing these. That's to me, that was the. And again, it was great because we knew it was meant to be fun, and it was meant to be the spirit of whatever Dave was trying to bring to Van Halen. We kind of knew that, and the joke was the other guys couldn't dance as well as Dave, right? I mean that goes back to what Dave wanted in Red Ball Jet. Dave wanted that. He wanted the show. He wanted those guys in his band to be able to put on a show. And so all those elements, from the trying to raise the stakes on the backyard parties to put pressure on the Van Halen brothers to say, my band might not be as musically as good as you guys are, but we're going to put on a better show than you, and to sort of raise the game of what was going on. That's all goes back to Dave before Van Halen. And so when Dave gets into Van Halen, one of the reasons why he's in is because Eddie and Alex kind of know instinctively that we need a guy like this. As we all know as Van Halen fans, that's one of the the reasons we need him. With the PA system, right? But we need the guy who can be the front man, the guy who can put on the show, the guy who can bring the energy, because Eddie's introverted. Alex is behind the drum kit. This is the Mark Stone, their bass player. Great guy. Mm-hmm. Just had a great opportunity to talk to him in Pasadena again, but he's a quiet guy. Mm-hmm. I mean, so he's not Dave.
That's right.
So you bring Dave into that group. There you go. You have that energy. You have that charisma that you want if you're trying to perform.
I agree with that. And a lot of people, including myself, I'll put myself in the same picture. Sometimes we'll say, "Oh, Dave's a little over the top. He's a little too much. He laughs at his own jokes and all that kind of stuff." But you know what? You can't have one without the other. So that's the way it is with Dave Lee Roth. You got him. What he is what he is. You can't have one without the other. You can't turn that down. He's a firecracker, but he's David Lee Roth, and we were very thankful for that. And I'm going to say one thing about the Red Ball Jet era, without giving any spoilers away for the book, something that I liked a lot, and I'll just kind of dance around it, was the fact about what they're doing a church gig. They were hired for a church gig, and eventually there's a bit of an intermission, and they're told why they were actually there. And so David Lee Roth, in true David Lee Roth form, says, "Okay, well, so we're here for this reason. Let's give them a reason." And they address it in only true David Lee Roth form, and it's the best. It's the best.
That's a story that was told me by the drummer's girlfriend, who I'm friends with on Facebook, and I've talked to her a number of times on the phone. And that was all parcel of that's this whole Dave was just going to turn up the temperature wherever they were playing, whatever way he could. And if he thought he could tweak some people in a certain way, he went ahead and did it. And that's, we can go through and talk about the infamous naked backyard flyer. I mean, that was all part and parcel of what Dave wanted to do, which was to bring attention to his band and say, hey, you know what? We're not going to be ignored, and I'm here to entertain. That's it. That's what he was put on the earth to do. There's no question about it. And so he was game to do that before the Van Halen brothers ever said, you can join our band.
That's right. And that's, they didn't have your social media. They didn't have Facebook and social media or internet as we know it. Nothing like that. So they had to guerrilla marketing back in the day, doing the posters, and they put up, semi-naked photos. And what if, and flying is supposedly going to fly into a venue with a helicopter thanks to, some funding from Dad and things like that. I mean, what the heck? We're going to have naked people flying into a helicopter? No. The poster's naked. We're not going to fly in naked, but the thing's canceled.
And, I hope people read the book to understand the whole thing about that, the naked flyer. The naked flyer, that happened, and they did rent the stadium and all that stuff. But, the stuff about the helicopter, I'd probably, if you were going to ask me to pin that down, I probably was just like Dave talking, like, oh, yeah, my dad's going to pay for a helicopter. Don't worry. That was what happens at US Festival. They do the same, that's what they do, right? They arrive by helicopter. So, again, it's like, even before, you fake it till you make it, maybe or maybe not. I don't know whether Dr. Roth really was going to rent a helicopter or not to land them at this show. Which, again, it's being played, just people understand, at a middle school football stadium, okay? We're not talking about like LA Coliseum. We're talking about middle school. That was the idea, that we're going to land on a helicopter and get out and play for this concert for whatever, but it doesn't matter, right? Because they were telling people we're going to come in by helicopter, and people believed it, for whatever reason. So, the flyer's up, and next thing you know, Red Ball Jet has gotten to the point where the city fathers of Pasadena are angry about this. Alternator angry about this stunt that they're pulling, basically.
That's right. I'm going to go back just a little bit to we were talking about earlier about how Van Halen was so tight, playing so many gigs, being so rehearsed. And I don't have the numbers exactly right from the book, so forgive me on that. But when they go into the studio to record, and we're kind of going a little out of order here, but they go to record the first album, and they come under budget when they work with Ted in the studio. I think they came in somewhere around $50,000 or something for the release of Van Halen 1. Yep. And was it Fleetwood Mac? Was it Fleetwood Mac as a band I'm thinking of? And it was about one of those bands who were about $400 and some odd $1,000 over budget. Yeah,
that's right.
So Van Halen rehearsed, bam, 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 bam. But guess where I'm going with that is we're going to talk a lot. There's about 3 or 4 questions I have on the itinerary about Kiss. Obviously, the only thing I talk about more on the show other than Van Halen and my good friend Adam from Futone is Kiss. A lot of fans here are Kiss fans, and Kiss has a huge part in this book. So if you're a Kiss fan and you're a Van Halen fan, you're double your money's worth when you buy this book, because there's a lot of Kiss references in it, a lot of Gene Simmons, and there's other things as well too. So they go and they work with Gene Simmons for a little bit, and Van Halen was basically a power trio. We take David Lee Roth out of the band. This band had their stuff down, and saved a lot of time. Now, Eddie goes into the studio, and overdubbing his work was foreign to him. Just like I was telling you off the camera, I feel foreign tonight because I got all this new gear in front of me and I'm not comfortable. That's Eddie in the studio. Okay, so Ted says, okay, now what about if you played a rhythm part here? And Eddie's like, well, I don't do that. I just play this stuff. How much do you think Gene Simmons, and that's talking with Gene Simmons when Gene's trying to encourage him to overdub, and he says no at the time. How much would you give credit to Gene Simmons for Eddie, future Eddie, current Eddie, for overdubbing and becoming the songwriter and arranger that he is, and producer?
Yeah, Gene, I just can't help but think about the whole, was Gene trying to steal Eddie? But we'll put that one aside. I think one of the things I would say about that whole incident where they go to Village Recorders first and put the basic tracks down, then they go to New York and do the overdubbing at Electric Lady. I'm of the opinion that really cemented, at that point in time, at least in Eddie's mind, that he did not want to do a lot of overdubbing. Now, as we know, as time went on, Fair Warning and 1984, there's more layering and there's more of a effort to build more of a dense soundscape. But I think for sure the frustration that Eddie felt in trying to all of a sudden on the spot come up with these parts that he was not planning on coming up with, it basically is like Gene's like, well, we're going to double this, and we're going to do, that's one thing, but then we want to do this, this rhythm part or something where he's like, well, I've never played a rhythm part underneath this because I solo and there's just bass behind me. I think that did do a lot actually to sort of to help affirm in Eddie's mind that he didn't like that. And then when Ted Templeman comes in and says, look, I just want to capture this. I want to capture the guitar playing as it is, basically. We'll do some minimal overdubs, and I Feel Your Love Tonight, a couple songs, maybe there's a little bit of overdubbing. We're going to do very minimal overdubbing. Eddie was like, yeah, you're right with where I want to be. And that I think that's one of the reasons why it was sort of an accident of history in some ways, because again, Ted Templeman was a guy who sort of had this knack at sensing what the artist wanted. So you listen to some of the Doobie Brothers records, obviously there's tremendous percussion and there's horns. I mean, so Ted wasn't just a guy like stuck mics in a room and said we're just going to capture a live take necessarily of everything, but that Ted understood what was great about Van Halen was you hear them live, the guitar playing, that's what's so great. The fact that Eddie can play the rhythm, go into the solo, right back on time, come back in, and it's just magic how he could do that. Hey, let's get that on tape. And I think that was just a good accident of history in some ways, that you have a producer like Templeman, who was the guy who really wanted to snatch these guys up and make a record with them. And then coming out of the Gene situation was really, I think, helped Eddie maybe solidify in his mind that this is what I want to do, which is just put it down as simply as possible, which is Eruption is obviously the classic example of that. Exactly.
And Ted was the hit maker of the time, or one of, for sure. And I think a good example of a good hit maker is someone who can get in the mindset of the artist totally inside. So with the other bands like you're talking about, now there's more musical things going on. There's horns, there's this and there's that. There's all kinds of different things. Van Halen is as bare bones as can be, but he got inside the mindset of Eddie Van Halen. He knew how Eddie played, as you said, and figured, why put extra sprinkles on this when we've got the core and the nucleus right here? He just found a way to capture it. There are some things that Van Halen didn't like about it, and we'll get into that later, just some of the outboard gear and things like that. But as a whole, it was absolutely perfect, and it goes a huge kudos have to go to Ted on that one as well too.
He when you look at his discography, I mean, I personally I think he's pretty underrated. I mean, I know obviously as Van Halen fans, we rate him very highly as a producer, but I think in sort of the history of producers, there's guys, I won't mention their names, but they're come immediately to mind. You're like, these are the greatest producers in rock history. And I think Ted doesn't always get in that category. But if you look for the work he did with Little Feat, listen to that second Little Feat record he did, the sounds, the tones. And again, that's Don Landy too. Both of those guys together capture these guitar tones, these drum sounds that are so perfect, so crystal clear. In fact, I know a guy who is an engineer who does contract work for Warner Brothers, and talked about how when he was one of the guys who worked on remastering some of the Doobie Brothers stuff for the box set. He said that they were playing it back. He's the engineer and the producer and a couple of other people in the room, and everyone in the room was like, today with all of the plugins, everything I could do, I could never get a bass sound that's good again. He's like, I could not get a bass sound as good as is on this Doobie Brothers track. And so the fact that Ted is so versatile, again, he can sort of musically so versatile, but also, again, capturing that sound. I mean, imagine, we all know that there are records that we listen to that goes, it just doesn't sound very good. We don't like that sound. To me, I'm very obsessed with how records sound, the tones, the drum sound, the bass sound, the vocal sound. Someone records the first Van Halen record and it sounds like a record you don't like the sound of. It's just, or sounds very dated. Listen, it sounds so 80s or it sounds so 70s. We would all be so lost as fans, whereas Don and Ted, they just got it. They nailed it. They nailed the entire thing, and that's why that album, like a lot of, Van Halen 1, Led Zeppelin 2, we go down the list. They're timeless records that you can put on and go, it's you wouldn't change it. I mean, I wouldn't change anything. Maybe Eddie and Alex would change. We could say we might change things about it, but to me, and I think 99% of Van Halen fans, the four guys, the team that put it together, the studio, Sunset Sound, we wouldn't want to change anything about the way that record came out.
I agree. It's kind of the holy grail. I mean, not just for the Van Halen fans, but it's as fans of guitar, fans of rock, how it changed rock. I mean, it really puts a lot of things. It raises that bar, and it's brought musicians out from under the woodwork that have copied it, that have tried it. They're still going after that sound, trying to copy it with new digital technology. It's just not there. But before I jump over to the chat, I want to do another plug for the book again too, because one of the things I want to say about the book, I'm going to show the book again as well too, if you can see it here, Van Halen Rising. And for those of you watching it on YouTube, if you're not watching on Facebook, in the description below I have a link directly to the Van Halen store where you can purchase this. It's under $20. It's like 18 and something, and you can get it signed or unsigned. And we're going to be giving away a copy tonight too, signed. We just have to figure out what that trivia question is. I haven't figured that one out yet. It's going to be a good one. I don't want to make it too easy, but we're going to give away, and this goes to show you how cool Greg is. Greg offered to do a signed copy. Instead of just sending you a signed copy, which is great, but we're gonna personalize it. So whoever wins it, I'm gonna tell Greg who the winner is, and he's gonna personalize it to him or her. But get that book; it's fantastic. And the reason why I'm plugging it, for $20, some of the things that I've discovered in this book, just the guitar influences that influence Eddie Van Halen alone. If I can go on the record and say this, the guitar influences alone that you're going to discover that you may not know about, you probably don't know about. I'm not talking about Eric Clapton and people like that. I'm talking about things that you probably will not know until you read this book, and I'm not going to give it away because that alone is worth the $20 for that portion alone. And the rest of the stuff you're going to get is gravy and icing on the cake. But let's jump over to the chat for a quick second. We got Ty Price. Quentin James has just finished his video for the contest. I'm giving away an EVH Wolfgang guitar for a contest here to celebrate.
Well, that's a nice contest.
To celebrate reaching 3,000. Yeah, it's your entry level one. That's hey, you know what? The book is the same value of that guitar as far as what you get in that book, and that's a fact. That's a fact. That's a fact. Frank C is joining us saying good evening everyone. Hello Eric and Greg. Poison Ivy saying awesome. Rob Ashby saying hey Eric. Rocamp 56. Good evening everyone. Looking forward to the show. Hello Poison. Scott MacArthur, Prez 46. Hi Eric and Greg. John Storms. Sup Greg? Wearing your shirt. Drew Baines, yes. Hey, Max Nesbitt. For the most part, I'm just going to go down and recognize people's names. Keith Pass, Vinny Romano, Greg Walker. Great book, great history of the band. You dug deep. I agree with that. Let's talk about this one. This one's there's different stories about this one all over the place. Insomniac Matt says, I know in Van Halen's contract they have the bowl of M&Ms with the brown ones removed backstage as a way of them making sure the contract was actually read. True. Do you have anything you can contribute to that story?
Beyond the fact that I was able to unearth, I had done I was doing a blog series over on Tumblr for a long time, and I can see if I can unearth this and I can pass it along to you. Mm-hmm. The origin of that, I don't know exactly when. Presumably Dave came up with that idea, but that post, I'm pretty sure post-dated 1978, after they were off the road. I'm sure Dave had his own ideas about how they've been treated as an opening act, and they're like, we're headliners now, we're going to change that. But when you, I have the news articles from the Colorado State University newspaper that talk about the incident, the basically when they trashed the backstage when the brown M&Ms were in the bowl. I can see if I can pull that up and send it to you. It's
sure.
To share. It's actually a pretty funny story. But again, the legend sort of got bigger and bigger and bigger. But they definitely decided to set an example and to basically say, yes, you guys did not follow the contract. Here's what's going to happen. And so, yeah, it's an amusing set of, as you imagine, the president of the university was not pleased, as you might imagine.
It's really cool too.
Van Halen wasn't welcome back.
That's right. And here again, we got to nod back to Dave again. I'm sure that was his idea. Prince 46 saying, hey, Bruce, Peter Schaefer, Vinny Romano, Carlo Santin. He was kind of asking, how did you start this monumental task? But we kind of alluded to it because, you wanted to capture this book because you're a historian. And if you didn't do it, you felt like it was your duty to bring this to us. Thomas Santiago says, hey, Eric and Poison, Rockbiter blast from the past from a great VH fan. Agreed 100%. Stone Cold Tim, hey guys, looking forward to a great chat. Greg Walker, Mr. BHB Jr., Mickey Giesbergs from Holland. I got to correct this time. And this is late for him. It's got to be about 3 or 4 in the morning.
Thanks for
actually wanted to check this out tomorrow, but got too much going on. 3 a.m. here. There we go. But might as well grab some beers and check this out. Not able to catch a lot of these live shows because of the time zone, and I appreciate that, buddy. You're diehard, and if you're gonna stay up for a late one, this is the one. This is the holy grail tonight. Keith Pass, my ads go to 11. Dan Wilhide's joining. I'm telling you, when I read these names, some of these names you may or may not know, but they're the diehards.
Yeah, I know Dan's name, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Still bowling for dollars. Thanks for writing the book. I think I might have read a few of these. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. James, my buddy from Ottawa, is joining us from the Canadian side. Blackie DH, another diehard. Mickey Giesbergs. Let me see here. Down towards the bottom. And I apologize if I've missed anybody. And actually, I have to mention this too, because Adam Power says Music Zoo also has an EVH contest going, and I would not be doing my duty if I did not mention my sponsor, Music Zoo. Very, very proud to bring those guys on, and I'm thankful that they took me under their wing. They're giving away an EVH standard Wolfgang as well, along with the lunchbox. Nice. So go to themusiczoo.com, find out details on that, and that's a nice combo. If you're a new guitar player or a kid or something, you have nothing, you start with an amp and a guitar, you're off to the races. So that's great. Dutchy5150 says, hey guys, can't tell you how much I love your VH Rising book, Greg. It's awesome.
Thanks, man.
It's
Thanks,
fantastic.
Dutchy.
So let's jump back over to now. This is going to go a little bit of reverse, and nothing to do with the book. Let's talk about how and when you discovered Van Halen, and how did it change your life?
So I'll tell the story a little bit differently than I typically do. I had a couple of things that allowed me, I think, laid the groundwork for me to really appreciate Van Halen and the guitar playing particularly. So I was born in 1969. So in the late 70s, I had an uncle who lived. So I was about 9 or 10 years old and was living with us. He was just in between residents, let's just say. And he was living with us, and he was a guy who was a fan of Cream, Mountain, these types of bands, and sort of, he'd play these. I'd hear him playing these records, and I was a little kid, obviously, but he would talk about, what's this? And he said, this is Mountain, this is Leslie West, and it didn't mean anything to me. A couple of years later, 3-4 years later, I ended up going to a camp, and I remember that I would hang out in one of the cabins, and it was 1980 or 81. I guess it was 1981, because the records that this guy who had brought his stereo to camp was playing were Black Sabbath, Heaven and Hell, AC/DC, Back in Black, and then Moving Pictures by Rush. And so that's, my musical tastes were not fully formed at that point. I wasn't a guy who was like, into hard rock at the time particularly. I was just sort of listening to the radio. My parents played different stuff growing up, whatever they played. But that definitely sort of like made an impression on me. This is pretty cool. Fast forward 3 years later, I heard Jump, and it just blew my mind. So I'm about 14 at the time, half America, teenagers my age at that moment in history. I just couldn't wait to get my hands on the record. I bought the single first, and I flipped the single over. So this would have been the spring of 1984, maybe February. I flipped the single over, and I heard House of Pain. And for me, that was, I can't even put into words what that did for me. The guitar tone, the playing, the whole thing, it set me off to be a guitar player. As I've already mentioned, and I'd be happy to say over and over again, I'm not a very good guitar player, but it got me playing electric guitar, and it got me to go to my, eventually I bought 1984, and I went to see the 1984 tour in New Jersey at the Meadowlands, and that was it. So that was how it started for me. But I want to give props to my uncle, who I think, again, sort of, he was like, this is Cream. And it didn't mean anything to me at the time. And he'd say, this is whatever, this is Led Zeppelin. And it didn't mean anything to me at the time. But to have that sort of cool uncle who was, the sort of dazed and confused type of uncle, if you know what I mean, that was exactly what he was like, that vibe. He kind of turned me on to this music. And, later when I heard Van Halen, I think all that sort of interest in rock guitars was already kind of in me because I had heard that stuff, along with, again, all sorts of other music growing up. But that really set me up to be a guy who loved rock guitar and became a Van Halen fan.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Uncle, right?
It was my favorite story about him, and I've told it before, and I'll tell it again, is that I remember going into his room, and he had a little pipe. I'll just leave it there. And I said, Dad smokes a big pipe. Why do you smoke a little pipe? He's like, oh, let me just I should put that away or whatever.
That's hilarious.
That was my cool uncle, yeah.
Cool uncle. I love it. Well, I have the next question I have for you, which is probably, I think I just got the answer, but let's just throw it out there anyways, because I like to throw my opinion in on it too.
Sure.
So we have to take a time capsule, and we have to go into the Van Halen catalog, and 500 years from now, or couple hundred years from now, they're going to unearth this time capsule, and we need to tell the people that are flying around their little spaceships who Van Halen was. What album are you going to stick in that time capsule?
I'm gonna throw you a curveball. I'm gonna break into the vault at Warner Brothers and take the reels from the demo, the 1977 demo, and throw that in the vault and play that.
That's awesome.
For me, that is something that, so even more than the first record, and I think I'll say this, all the songs aren't great on that demo. I mean, I like all the songs on it, but if you go down the 25-song demo, which has been bootlegged to death, obviously, there are stellar songs, and then there are songs that are just sort of, for Van Halen standards, are just okay.
Yep.
But the whole fact that was basically done in just a couple of days, where it was, I talk about it in the book, they just basically played the songs. There was not like, okay, we have to record this, what are we going to do here? It was just basically play your songs. Play You Really Got Me, play Running with the Devil, play House of Pain, play it all. And that is the essence of what makes Van Halen great, that those guys had gigged so much, had played in the clubs for years, backyard parties, and were so ready to take the next step that they could put this down. And to me, it's just the energy, as we talk about that Let's Get Rockin', all these songs, the energy is so great on that. And so, even before you get to, quote unquote, Ted Templeman really producing them, because all he was basically doing was going, play the songs. Here's what we're going to do, play the songs. There was not really a big effort it was just Dave sing.
No rearranging or anything like that.
Yeah, there was no coaching, right? There was no coaching. In fact, it's to the best of my knowledge, they, I know this, that they hadn't actually arranged the songs as they turn out the record. Like we know that On Fire is different. So basically Ted hadn't sort of started to work with them to say, okay, we're gonna chop this part, or we're gonna do this differently. It's just pure Van Halen, like you would have heard of the Starwood, heard of the Whiskey at that time. And to me, that's why people's jaw dropped when they saw this guitar player and heard this band. It was just, the energy is undeniable. The charisma, the thing just leaps out of the speakers to me, and that's what I would put in the time capsule. But if you force me to do a record, I could do a record too for you. But
That's good. And they gave me goosebumps. They've just simmered down, because that's the first time anyone's ever given that answer. And I try to ask this. I don't ask it on every show, but I've asked it at least 24 times at least, and I've had a little bit of everything. Strangely, I don't think anyone has ever said Van Halen 3. Okay, we'll leave it there. But I've said Fair Warning, because Fair Warning to me, now if I was to pick a song, Unchained is it for me. Unchained moves me like no tomorrow. It's just racing down the street, the adrenaline, the testosterone. But that is the coolest answer I think I've ever been given, because I've never thought of it, never thought of the demos, and really that is it. That's the blueprint, or the DNA, like Eddie likes to say, that was set in stone for what was to come. Great answer. I love it. I totally love that answer. So here's a question to put a little bit of perspective on the book. The book, I mean, people just think, okay, you have an idea, you put it down on paper, you go to a publisher loves it, it's on the store shelves, we go buy it.
Oh, yeah.
What was the time frame from start to us having this in our hands? How long did that take? And maybe just give us a little bit of, history of that.
So first of all, I want to make sure that everybody understands that we've all seen The Shining with Stephen King. It wasn't the situation where you're like, I'm going to write a book, and so all I do all day is sit at the computer or the typewriter and type the book. So I really started first thinking about it around 2000, about the early history of Van Halen and that writing something about it. Not writing a book, but writing maybe an article for Van Halen News Desk or for the Inside or whatever it was going to be. Maybe a rock magazine. In 2009 or so. And that's when I really started to investigate the idea of trying to get something together that would give us a glimpse of what Van Halen was like before they were famous. And so that's where I started talking to a gentleman in particular, a guy who owned a club long gone now called the Rock Corporation in Van Nuys, California. Long gone. But he kind of told me some stories about Van Halen, hiring Van Halen, what happened in the audition when he hired Van Halen. Didn't like them at first. They came back and auditioned again like so many times, and they got the gig, and they played wet t-shirt contests with a bunch of bikers, and it was this big incident, which I describe in great detail in the book. Mm-hmm. And it's just, for me, that snowballed over time, where I sort of became more and more aware that there was a bigger story here. So in the summer, I was teaching college, and so in the summer times I would work hard on it, especially the interviews. I did a tremendous number of interviews. I would interview people, I'd transcribe the interviews, or I'd take, write up my notes or whatever, and then just continue to kind of pile them up. And what I was getting more and more as the years go on through 2011, 2012, people are saying, you need to talk to this person, you need to talk to this person. And I was starting to get more and more of the pieces of the puzzle in place, where I had contacted people who had host backyard parties, mm-hmm. multiple people who had gigged. One of the things I really wanted to do was get the musician's perspective, as long as the sort of civilian perspective. Guys who gigged on the same bills with Van Halen, who knew those guys and could kind of give me a musician's perspective on what those guys did that was different or similar to other bands. And so, but by the time it came to be around 2013 or so, I was definitely up and moving. And then the last year, the book came out in 2015, I guess. And so the last year or so before the book came out, last 2 years, that's when I was really intensely like, okay, I got to finish. Like, I had the research, I had pieces written, I had big chunks of it written, but I sort of finished it. So, the research, again, it just really was like a snowball. It wasn't like I woke up one day and said, I'm going to write a Van Halen book. It was good. I'm kind of interested in this. What was this about? This? And then I heard these stories, and people would say, you should talk to this person. Oh yeah, talk to my friend. This happened. He hauled gear for Van Halen. And that's sort of how it all started.
That's fantastic. And I'll just give a little analogy of something that I've written that's only an ebook. And I'm not going to say what it is yet, because it's probably never going to see the light of day. And Greg has had the opportunity to actually read it. And actually, I was very thrilled to have you read it. But to give you an idea, just like about a 50 to a 60 page ebook, how things have changed. And I've been working on that for probably about 6 years, probably longer than that. And in that short time, I've had to rewrite because I talked about MySpace. It's a promotional book for bands, and I've had to talk about MySpace. I go back in and make edit notes. Okay, there's no such thing as how we use MySpace.
Right, America Online. We don't need to worry about the folders anymore in America Online.
I know. So right. I can just imagine a book of that magnitude. So kudos on that. And I mean. And I've given up many times myself. So if I can give any piece of advice to writers, which I'm not a writer, I enjoy writing, but I'm not a writer. You're a writer. Maybe you might echo the statement too. If you have something, put it down. Try your best to get it out. Give it to someone who maybe has some legs in the business. Maybe can help you, point you in the right direction. Maybe, and this isn't a question I have on the itinerary, but could you offer some advice to some aspiring writers? Maybe like get it done.
I think the thing you'd want to do, anyone who wants to write today, the good news is, right, that put up a blog and start writing. People say, oh, no one's going to read it. Well, guess what?
Somebody will.
That's and someone will, and B, that's the reality we live in today, is that if you're Kim Kardashian, you put up a blog, millions of people are going to read it. Mm-hmm. If you're someone who does not have that huge platform, you're probably going to have to start, and you just start away and write. But I think the most important thing for anyone who wants to write is to just write on a regular basis. It's really hard. Look, I'll use the analogy to guitar playing. We all know how if you don't play for a long time, sometimes it feels really, really fresh. Like, oh, I haven't played. It feels different. I'm coming up with different riffs. My runs are different. But you also know that you've lost some of that muscle memory. There's something that not quite right. And if you don't play every day, you're not playing as well as you can. It's the same thing with writing. I don't write every single day, but I try to just understand that if you don't keep on your project, if you're working on an article, you're working on sort of a number of articles for your blog or whatever, if you don't keep steady progress on it, keep working on that, it's easy to stop working on it, just like working out. You stop working out because, hey, I don't want to get off the couch. I haven't been off the couch for a week. But if you go every day to the gym, it feels good. But if you don't keep that momentum going, it's hard to sustain it. The other thing, too, is like anything else, your writing gets better. I mean, that's the thing is when you rewrite and rewrite, if people knew how many times I rewrote, I wish anyone who would be the person who just sits down with a computer and just sort of types a whole bunch of stuff and suddenly it's magically a chapter. It's not like that. You write stuff and you're like, this is crap. This is good. Oh, I can put these pieces together, and you sort of work through that. But it's a matter of committing the time and the energy and wanting to get better. I think most people, the vast majority of people, are capable of doing some sort of writing that would be satisfying to them and people would want to read, but you got to work at it, and that's the thing. Is like anything else, like, I'm not going to be able to go to the gym and bench press. I don't even tell you, I'm not going to be able to go to the gym and bench press anything, near what maybe I could do 20 years ago. And I've never, but it's like, you can't just sort of wake up one day and I want to bench press 225 20 times like in the NFL. I mean, you have to go to the gym and work. And so same thing with writing and like guitar playing. I just think you just want to decide that you want to be a writer. If you want to write, whatever that is, invest the time into being a writer. Don't just sort of tell yourself, I'm a writer, or I can't write, because I think for the vast majority of people, they're capable of doing writing that people would want to read. Again, we're not all John Grishams. I understand that we're not all going to be Stephen Kings, but we can all write for an audience, however big the audience is on the internet, get our material out there and share our point of view on things. So yeah, I would definitely say to people, go for it.
Good. Very good advice. And I'm seeing another fan over in the chat who is very successful on YouTube as well. Robert Baker's, and he's a big Van Halen fan. Very successful. And the reason why I'm mentioning his name, he's very successful on YouTube with his videos, and he's shared with Guitar World and all these things. He's very, very successful. And I'm sure when he does product demos, he does them a lot better than I do, but I do some as well. And at the end of the day, when we're finished with this video that we're doing, or a project, now this could be a video, it could be you writing a book, it could be this person over here. We love it. We're proud of it. We send it to our people, the companies that we work with, and they like it, and we're happy. But there's always something we don't like about it. I'm speaking for myself, and I'm sure Robert has that same thing too. Him and I kind of talked about this off the air, and there's always something, I wish I could have did this in the video, whatever. Is there anything, and I don't know if you've ever been asked this question, I haven't been able to take in all your interviews, I've read some and seen some and listened to some. Is there anything you would have liked to cover in the book that you didn't get a chance to, or maybe it hit the cutting room floor?
There were a couple of things that, as I kind of joked about this in Pasadena, there were a couple of stories that were, let's say, gray area stories that would have been cool to put in the book. And it actually hasn't anything to do with the sort of the things you might think. It's not necessarily like the sort of how would I put this? There were a couple of stories in the book that I thought would have been really cool. That would have kind of been something that would have made a lot of people smile and would have been a fun and sort of risque aspect of Van Halen. That it just wasn't. It wasn't. I didn't get the green light from a person to go with the story, and that would have been something I would have liked to put in the book, because I actually think it's a pretty legendary Van Halen backyard party story. But for me, I feel like I wish I could have maybe done a bit more on the 1978 tour, because there were but 180 shows, there was so much. There was actually quite a bit of stuff that I ended up cutting out about some of the bigger stadium gigs, and maybe nothing earth-shattering, but it maybe kind of more would have been a deeper look into the 78 tour. But at that point, you sort of get to the point where you're like, I've got a 300+ page book. You have to sort of find a way to sort of say, okay, we got to hit the highlights here. And so, as you can imagine, with that tour lasting from March until December, there was a tremendous amount of stuff that I had that were some really cool stories. But I was just trying to capture the highlights of the tour and kind of give us the stages where they start playing very, very small venues, third build, 30 minutes, up to where at the end of the tour they're able to blow these big bands off the stage. So probably more on the 78 tour. And again, there's a couple of those stories. There were just things things that I, as a fan, couple things that would have given me pause as a fan, and one thing that I think would have been okay, but it just I didn't get the green light from someone to put it in. So yeah,
yep, that's good.
That's all.
Totally cool. And a couple of comments here. And what I'm going to do too is this is the first time ever on the show that I've had this much. As you can see here, I have 3 pages of questions.
Look at you, you're a writer. How you go?
I'm going old school tonight. I usually do the iPad, but my vision's getting really, really bad, and I'm not going to scroll for 10 miles on an iPad. And I'm not going to get to all of these. I'm going to try to go to the chat and I'm going to go back to some really cool ones because there's some really cool technical geek questions that all of us diehard Eddie Van Halens want to know. But there's a couple of people echoing the same statements in the chat. Jared Frost, a good friend and fan of the show and a big EVH Gear supporter, and Robert Baker, like I was just talking about, they're both kind of echoing the Sammy Hagar statement. Now, I've thrown all kinds of love David Lee Roth's way. I love Sammy Hagar too. I mean, I'd be a hypocrite if I said I don't like Sammy stuff, and if I'd be standing there, I'll go to get a drink and leave the stage while he's there or whatever. No, I love Sammy Hagar too. So Jared says he actually grew up listening to Sammy Hagar, and Robert Baker says the Sammy era is awesome because we got to see such a different side of Van Halen. I think the songwriting evolved a lot, become a lot more hits and things like that. Now, you can take it the other way. I found some of it to get a little sappy, a little too sappy for my liking. However, I'm not going to criticize it. But I'm going to jump right towards one of my last questions because of these guys talking about Sammy at this moment. So Michael Anthony's talking to Eddie Trunk the other day, and it's nice to see him talking out there doing interviews. Yep. And Mike's always been a very positive guy. I don't know the whole story what went on. You may know more than I do, probably do, and I really don't care what went on. It's between Eddie and Mike and the band and everybody else and their families. We don't need to know. So he's just toying around the idea. He'd love to be back in Van Halen. I know a lot of people love to have him back. We all love Wolfgang. Let's just say this happens. There's a tour out there. It's a share. It's back and forth. It's Dave and Sammy. Wolfgang has maybe some opportunity in the band. Would be great as well. Are you the guys going to be there buying tickets? What are your thoughts on that whole thing? And maybe just comment on that.
Well, a couple of things I would say. I mean, I would say as a Van Halen fan, I would really like more Van Halen in my life. Mm-hmm. And so I wish there would be a more active Van Halen. And I understand there are. Who knows? I don't know the reasons why Van Halen isn't touring this summer, isn't recording a new record, all these things. If that was the Van Halen that was going to be presented at this point in Van Halen's career, I mean, I think as a fan of the band, I could live with that. I am, as we talked about, I'm a Dave guy. I sometimes joke about disliking Sammy, but I don't dislike Sammy. I saw the 5150 tour twice. I saw I saw these tours. I played the records, all this stuff. So I have no axe to grind with Sammy at all. The thing I would say is, as a Van Halen fan, I would like to see the original 4 guys, meaning the 1978 band, on the stage to play. I'd like to see that. That's something that, honestly, let's face it, in an ideal world, could have happened at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Let's not even go there. It's just it's a long time ago. But the idea basically that would have been, if they played the 3 songs together up there, I could have died happy. Now, if the tour, if that was what was presented to say, here's what we're going to do, I'd go. Would it be my first choice necessarily? No. But would I like to see Mike back on a stage with Van Halen again in some form? Yes, I would. Would I like to see that circle squared and just to basically go, look, we've bygones are bygones. We've moved past it and on to the future, whatever Van Halen is after that. I would like to see that. If you're asking me whether you think that's going to happen, I always say 2 things. I always say I'll give you my opinion, and then I'll say we never know. Every time you sort of predict what Van Halen's going to do, it's I thought Dave would never get back with them.
I know.
After it just never, and it happened. So. Could it happen? I find it very, very difficult to imagine that happening for any number of reasons. But, I mean, look, they've got – here's what I would say. Think about this. They've got Irving Azoff as their manager. Irving Azoff is putting on shows this summer. Now, the name of the festivals are escaping me, but they basically are going to be the Doobie Brothers, Journey, the Eagles, and I think Fleetwood Mac. I could be wrong. East Coast and West Coast. They're doing one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast. You can be sure, I think we all can be sure, that Irving Azoff thought and probably asked Van Halen whether they would like to join that. Would you like to play with those other bands? I managed the Doobie Brothers. I met the Eagle. All the bands that he has a relationship with. Would you like to join that? And I assume they declined. I have to assume they declined. So there, you can be, all of us can be certain that Irving Azoff as a guy who's the A plus, the manager rankings. I mean, he's up there in the absolute peak.
Oh yeah,
their managers. He wants them to tour again. He wants them to do something. So if there's a will, there's a way. And if anyone could make it happen, I imagine Irving would be the guy who basically, I can figure out how to make this happen. So we'll see.
Yep. And the cliche "never say never" applies to some bands, and it definitely doesn't apply to other bands. Van Halen, I think you can label that "never say never" with Van Halen, and you may be surprised. Other bands like there's different Skid Rows and bands like that. There's "never say never." Well, no, that's never it's gonna happen. Is what you're gonna say with some of these bands, right. But Van Halen, you never know. I'd like to see it happen. Another thing too, this is another nod to the book, but I promised we would have some good factual things about Eddie Van Halen, as far as things a lot of people know. Us diehards know this, and some things I even discovered, some names that come up in the book that I was even unfamiliar with. But people thought about Eddie Van Halen coming right out of the gate with the tapping technique that he has now, that's synonymous with his style. Or the book will allude to, and here again, the price of admission. You buy this book, and then alone, another tidbit that's worth the price of the book is the fact how Eddie was influenced. He had a mutual friend, Terry Kilgore. And the fact that the tapping didn't even come from him, come from Harvey through Resnick and then to Kilgore. Maybe talk a little bit about that and how he was a very big, not only a good role model on Eddie and a friend, but how it may have kind of shaped Van Halen Eddie as we know him today as well too.
Yeah, let me give a shout out. I know he's not listening, but give a shout out to Terry Kilgore. He's probably in his house up there in the San Gabriel Valley, playing his guitar right now. He's a guy that was considered by pretty much everyone in the scene to be sort of neck and neck with Eddie at one point in time in the early 70s. They were very good friends. They remained friends, even after Van Halen broke. Van Halen became famous. Terry did not become famous in the same sort of way. He did have fame later with playing with Dave, and played on the DLR band record, and he played on the other album Dave did in the 90s. He played with Dave, but Terry, they were guitar rivals in some sort of way, but I don't think it was sort of like you can imagine two guys being friends and competing for the same quarterback job. It wasn't like they were anything but friends, but there was a definitely like they were pushing each other. And one of the things that ended up happening, yeah, exactly, they were the gunslingers. And one of the things that ended up happening was that, long story short, is that Terry got tipped off to the fact that a guitar player named Harvey Mandel, who had been in Canned Heat, who had sort of pioneered this. It's very hard for me to describe the tapping in the right sort of way. It's different in a lot of ways than what the tapping that Eddie did. And I always say it was just a starting point. But Terry finds out that this guitar player lives near him. He knows this guitar player because he knows the name from Canned Heat. And he knows this guy is talented. At this time, actually, soon after this, Mandel was considered to be the replacement for Taylor in the Rolling Stones. I mean, this was a great guitar player, and so sure Terry takes some lessons, and Mandel teaches Terry a little bit of tapping, and there was basically a early tutorial. And again, understand it's not the same type of tapping that Eddie did later. It's not that flowing sort of legato, very different tapping. But there was sort of like, oh, here's what you can do when you put your other hand on the neck. And so, Eddie's been very, very cagey. And I always say to people and ask me why, I say it's like a musician. I'm a magician who doesn't want to reveal his tricks. I mean, it's sort of he's entitled to basically be coy about that stuff. One of the things I ended up quoting in the book is that from a different Eddie Van Halen book that came out in the 80s is that Neil Schon was interviewed by this author and talked about how Neil Schon basically pushed Eddie up against the wall some point in the spring of '78 and was like, come on, square with me. Like, where did this start for you? And Eddie said, yeah, it's, Mandel was the guy who sort of maybe was, Eddie mentioned Mandel to Schon. And Eddie also saw Mandel. It's George Lynch told me that, and that's kind of out there because Mandel was playing at the Starwood and stuff like that. And so I think it was all kind of, for Eddie, kind of grist for the mill. And so the question about what Eddie did with the tapping, and people ask me, number one, like, well, if he learned it around 1974, why didn't he start tapping like that? Because if you listen to bootlegs, he wasn't. And I don't really have a good answer for you about that, other than the fact that I'm assuming that Eddie, it just didn't sort of, all the pieces had sort of not fall into place for him with what he thought he would do with it. Maybe he thought like, well, yeah, I'll do the sort of the beer drinkers and Hellraisers, the one tap, like Gibbons does in that song. And that was sort of, just sort of a thing that was done. And a couple guys were doing that on the scene. But by 1977, as you talk about, that's where everything starts coming together for Eddie. And I don't think it was sort of it was no master plan. It was not like, I'm going to do all these things. But it's, again, you've played so much and you've developed this incredible mastery of the instrument. Think about the same thing with Hendrix. Hendrix is playing on the Chitlin circuit in the early 60s. He's like touring with James Brown and all these guys, around playing, getting fired by these different these different guys. He's playing, and suddenly Are You Experienced comes out, and you're like, oh my God, what's that?
Exactly.
By 1977, he's got the Strat. He's figured out how to work the whammy bar where he can do these incredible dive bombs and not go out of tune. He's got the tapping. He's got the Variac. He's got the high gain amp. He's got it all together, and that all those pieces kind of fall into place really in 1977. Again, compare the guitar playing on the Gene Simmons demo, which is recorded, as we know, November 1976, to what was done with the demo, which, again, that's the Van Halen style is changing. It's like starting to change around that late November 76 to early 77. It's changing. But they record the album in the summer, August and September. I mean, that's when it's like full-blown Eddie Van Halen, like we all know. And Eddie's really come into his own. He's kind of arrived as this is the basically the style that's going to make Eddie famous. It's there. It's captured. And so that was all, again, sort of all the pieces sort of falling into place. And the fun thing about the book for me was to kind of go through and talk about the Variac and talk to guys who were in the, for example, the guys in the band Dred Zeppelin, who came up on the same scene as Eddie. Again, they didn't become famous till the late 80s, but they, one of the guys, my friend Gary Putman, tremendous guitar player, great guitar player, still in Dred Zeppelin today, talk about how Eddie would have the Variac kind of like in a canvas bag. Like, he wasn't like necessarily trying to like make it like top secret, but he was like not trying to like lay it out there for everyone.
Colonel Sanders with the chicken. You don't give it away.
Yeah, right. He wasn't like. He wasn't being super paranoid about it, but he also wasn't going to broadcast to like everybody and the guitar players watching. Right. And he started he started using the Variac and like all these different things he would do, and these guys were coming, these other guys, to watch him. There were lots of great guitar players in the scene, and then these guys would come and watch Eddie. And I'll go back to what I said about Tracy G. Those guys who may be joining us didn't hear the beginning part of the conversation. Tracy G of Dio fame did those '90s records with Dio. Talked about how every time he went to see Eddie, and I quoted them in the book, it was like something raised the bar. He's like, okay, whatever. He does this thing with, with the fan picking. Okay, I'll try to practice that. And he's trying to practice the fan picking. And then he's like, the whammy bar, and he said, oh man, I got to figure out, I can't get the whammy bar in tune, but I'll keep trying that. I'm going to get that whammy bar to stay in tune. And then he said, when he heard the tapping, he just said, the 1977, the summer of 77, where Eddie starts doing that in the clubs, he just said, forget it. He's like, this guy, I'll never catch up to this guy. I'll never, ever, ever catch up to this guy. And that's where he just said, he just got to give it up for the guy, because he said he was always innovative and was always raising the bar one step farther. He said, sort of like, he talked about how he just like thought he could touch the bar, and then it was just like, he's like, I'm never going to reach the bar. No.
I've alluded to that a lot on the show too. It's almost like a treadmill. You would catch up a little tiny bit, and then he's on to something else, and it could just be tone, maybe not even technique, just tone. You're like, oh man, I just got to here, and I think I come closer. Now he's got this. But that's another thing too. Like, that's where I kind of alluded to that very early into the program tonight. I said one of the nice pieces of the bonus of buying the book is just discovering some of these people as guitar players. Trust me, you're going to thank both Greg and I later when you read this book for me telling you about it and reading it in Greg's book. Some of these artists, like Harvey, a perfect example. Now, I know I don't have the name of the album right, but with Harvey's album, was it Shane Grenade or something like that?
Shane Grenade, that's right.
Oh, I got it right? Wow. Okay, I didn't have that written down, so I was close.
It's kind of weird, yeah, like the weirdest album name, yeah.
Yeah, and you go and listen to this stuff. Look it up. It's on YouTube. There's some stuff out there, and you can listen to this stuff. This is stuff that influenced Eddie Van Halen long before the Claptons and things like that, and Cream and all that kind of stuff. And the bonus you get from the book, learning this stuff, and there's, trust me, I know I've given away a little tiny bit tidbit from the book. That thing is chocked full of these little tidbits that you're going to, like, if you paid $50 for the book, you're going to say, man, the stuff I learned about Van Halen that I had no clue about, the artist now that I'm going to like because of that. And it might even make some of these people better guitar players too, to go back and kind of, oh wow, so let's reverse engineer Eddie Van Halen, and and that makes you a better guitar player. But one of the next questions I have on the itinerary, and we're doing pretty good on time, we're doing 10:15, we'll probably wrap up in about another 15 minutes. I only on my second page, but I'd like to try to do all the good gear questions.
Sure.
So one of the things I always try to give advice to people, especially the younger players coming through the channel, when they're trying to emulate Eddie Van Halen's tone, and I'm going to use myself as an example of my failures and trying to chase the tone. Eruption is something we always go after, and the Van Halen 1 sound, even though Eddie says in different Guitar World interviews the earlier Van Halen stuff is easier to emulate, I find that's the holy grail. It's a harder one to emulate, but we'll leave that for an argument for another day. people often use delay pedals in their guitars and lots of delay to compensate to get that sound, especially in the tapping. Whereas, and I say, please go less on delay, and I used to use a lot of it. Go heavier on reverb. Don't go stupid on it. But let's go back to you talking to Ted Templeman and working on that album and the special treatments that were given to Van Halen 1 in the studio and here again, Eddie and Alex today look back at that and say, well, maybe it didn't capture us the best way, but they were treating Eddie's Marshall in the reverb rooms, and they had the EMT reverb units and things like that. Talk a little bit about that experience, how you got to hear that from the horse's mouth from Ted and Don Landy, obviously, back in the day.
Yeah, Landy too. I mean, that was the thing. It was great. I was very fortunate to be able to talk to Don. I was very persistent in sort of trying to figure out how to get in touch with him, and talking about this sort of obsession that I was developing with wanting to get this book the right way. And I said, I have to talk to Don Landy. I'll walk to California and start knocking on doors to find Don Landy. But one of the stories that Don told me that I quote in the book is he talked about how when he and Eddie first started working together. And I'm not sure if this was the demo or the album, but there was something where Don they had a Marshall, and they were trying to mic the Marshall, and Don was saying, I want to get this mic more in the cone. Let me see if I get it right up as far in the cone. And he was kind of pushing it against the mesh, and Eddie got a knife and just cut it away right away.
There you go.
He said, that's when I knew that this guy is committed 100% to whatever we have to do. It was going to end up happening. And I think Ted and Don working together both recognized that, say what you want about Van Halen, there was something spectacular about the guitar playing that they wanted to get on tape. And so that was, I think, Ted has said this, I quote him in the book, basically said, my basic game plan was, we'll get all the other things lined up, all the other ducks in a row with doing this album, and get the drums, the guitar, the vocals, but we're going to blow the guitar up all over the map. And that's why I think, again, one of the reasons why Van Halen is so revered, Van Halen 1 is so revered by guitar players, as we know, it's an album that is dedicated to Eddie Van Halen's guitar tone.
I agree with that.
And to capturing that sound and the playing. And so that's where I think Ted got it. He's like, this is spectacular. This is really something that I want to figure out how to get on tape. And one of the things that Ted talked about at the time is that one of the reasons why he was with me when we talked is that one of the reasons why there was challenges with 5150 with doing the 1984 album 5150 was that Ted was a guy who had worked at Sunset Sound as an artist, right? So Ted, for those people who don't know, Ted was in a band called Harper's Bazaar. You can check them out on YouTube. They were like the Association. They were a very soft rock vocal band. He worked at Sunset Sound as an artist. For years he recorded there. Then he becomes, an engineer. A producer, and he was recording Little Feat, and he's recording Captain Beefheart, and he's recording Carly Simon. He's working at Sunset Sound, and so he knew, that was his home base. I mean, he understood how to make things sound a certain way. Him and Don did, and so I think that's one of the reasons why when they went up to 5150, there was that it caused tension, because I think it wasn't so much that I would just say that Ted knew how to get what he wanted on tape at Sunset Sound. So one of the things you'll hear from Ted is that a lot of what we love about the Van Halen sound is Sunset Sound, that they knew how Don and Ted and Ed, of course, they had that mastery of that room because they'd made so many records. They're Doobie Brothers. I mean, go to them, they worked there so much. We want it to sound darker. We want it to sound brighter. We want whatever. We want to give the guitar more of a thump. They knew how to do this in that space. And of course, the great story about the EMT plate, that Reverb. One of the things that I don't know if I mentioned in the book or not that Ted talked about is that how you would kind of go in and you would have to. I don't totally think I can describe properly an EMT plate, but it was basically like a rather large box that you would use to make this what was called plate reverb, this artificial reverb. And if you banged it if you banged it while it was mic'd or however it was hooked up a certain way, apparently it sounded like it was like the whole room was going to collapse. So you would basically sort of surprise someone. They would elbow it. Yeah, it was like the loudest thing in the world. So they had some fun when they were doing that, but sort of figuring out how to get that Run with the Devil guitar sound and those other things. And Yeah, I think what you alluded to earlier about the Van Halen brothers, I know that they have said that they wished it sounded more like Led Zeppelin 4. That was sort of what they, they heard the record and they were like, it's not exactly what they had hoped. But look, those guys were new artists and they trusted Ted. And I think at the end of the day, I would not want Van Halen 1 to sound like Led Zeppelin 4. No offense to Led Zeppelin 4. I mean,
great.
And so, it's a matter of opinion and taste, and I could understand why those guys had a certain thing, and you have a certain thing you're expecting, and you get something a little bit different. But yeah, it's Sunset Sound.
That's right. A couple nods to a couple more people in the chat here, and we'll be wrapping up in about 10 minutes. And, this is awesome. I always say a good measure of the show is when I don't even get to all the questions. And there's 3 pages. We're going to definitely have Greg back on again. But a couple good guitar shredders. We're talking about guitar shredders, Eddie Van Halen. We've got other good ones. There's so many guitar shredders in the chat with Jared Frost, guitar wannabe Craig. Craig Rundles is joining us. Craig is working with George Lynch right now, making the OG Bones guitars, a special limited edition. And, man, I'm telling you, I got to hold number 1 in my hands at NAMM and played a little bit on it. It was very, very cool. He knows what he's doing. Jared Frost. We got. The list is endless of guitar shredders. But Craig Reynolds is saying he would like to see Michael playing bass. I think we all would for sure. Earlier in the program, I was really giving some huge props to David Lee Roth, and just because he's very influential on what became Van Halen. And I love Kiss. I'm not the world's biggest Gene Simmons fan. He's kind of a hard guy to get in his wheelhouse. More power to him. He's the David Lee Roth of Kiss, for marketing and things like that. Love him or hate him. I love Ace Frehley to like no tomorrow. Love Ace Frehley. But so Kiss's manager, we have to give Gene Simmons a lot of props on Van Halen, because he really wanted Van Halen to succeed, and he put his neck out on the chopping block. And even as much pull as you think Gene Simmons would have was chopped down from Bill Aucoin to even Paul Stanley. So in the book, you get to hear the no commercial appeal. Van Halen just had no commercial appeal apparently, and was nothing they wanted to take on. And then I put Kiss on this platform, and where I was a little shocked to hear is even Paul Stanley had a bit of a involvement to Van Halen, not necessarily taken off at that point. Maybe just touch base on that a little bit.
Yeah, so I want to be careful what I say.
Yes.
Opinions about Kiss. No, I have some interesting. I'm of the opinion that Paul has tried to coattail this a little bit. So that's I'll leave that there. I want to give Gene a lot of credit.
Yes,
because Gene was the guy who, everybody, going back to Ted says Gene was on, Gene saw it. Gene saw what I saw. He saw the potential there. Where a lot of guys, as I talk about in the book, a lot of very, very important people in the record industry walked in and go, I don't want this band. This is old. This is Deep Purple. This is Black Sabbath. This is over. I don't want this. Anyway, so Gene saw that. And I think the thing that we should all understand as well is that when you think about the fact that those guys go to New York City and they play for Kiss's manager, they're not in their home base. They're literally playing on Kiss's equipment when they audition for Bill Aucoin. I'm not of the opinion that I like the Gene Simmons demo because it's so cool, but I'm not of the opinion that really captures.
Yeah, I agree.
What I like about Van Halen.
Yeah.
I think
tempos and things like that.
I think there's some cool stuff in there. I like the house. I really like I love the House of Pain on the Gene Simmons demo, but I think all in all, I don't think Gene picked the right songs.
Right.
But Gene was Gene. Look, Gene invested his money. Gene did everything, and we can say, well, Gene wanted to get rich off Van Halen. Again, agreed. But Gene was the guy who sort of said, this is something I see potential in. And remember, Gene could have pulled the move that other people pulled and could have said, no, I own you guys, and you can't use the demo. And
he said, take it, do what you can with it.
And let's give credit again to Dave. Dave takes the demo when other guys who are around the band and even guys in the band are like, well, what are we gonna do with this? Aucoin has shot us down. We have this demo tape, and what are we gonna do with it? Nobody wants this. And Dave goes right over to KROQ Pasadena to Rodney Bingenheimer, who was a guy who was on the scene, was a DJ, was definitely a hit maker in a lot of ways on the scene. And they play it on the radio. You can hear it on YouTube. And he's like, this is the first time Van Halen's getting played on the radio. And I'm thinking, this is David Lee Roth classic, right?
Yep.
He doesn't go on the radio and say, oh, by the way, Gene Simmons, who's arguably the most powerful man in music right now in 1976, can't get us a record deal. We must suck. He just says,
Here's the
Gene
music.
Simmons of Kiss helped us make this demo, and Rodney's like, awesome, put it on, and they play Running with the Devil, and there you go, they're on the radio. And so, give Gene credit, but also give Dave credit again for saying, yeah, we've gotten rejected in some other way, but it's not going to stop us. We're going to take this and we're going to run with it. And Templeman also heard that demo, eventually heard it before what he told me he remembered was that after the first night he saw Van Halen, somebody at Warner Brothers gave him the demo. Someone said, "Oh yeah, this has been kicking around the office or whatever." Like it had gotten, Gene, whatever, it had gotten to the Warner Brothers offices. Somebody ended up with a copy of the tape. Maybe, who knows? I don't know how it got there, but he said he heard it and he was like, "Yeah." He's like, he was sort of like hearing the songs, and he's like, they were sitting there with Don Landy listening to the tape the night before they signed the band. This is, the first night Ted sees him. He's going to bring the big wigs the next night. He goes, "We're going to go get these guys."
Exactly.
That's what Don Landy told me. We're going to go get these guys.
Yep.
We're going to get them. We're going to sign these guys. And so, in the end of the day, that sort of helps cement a lot of things about Van Halen's success.
There's a lot of props back to Gene. I mean, they brought over the car horns that Gene was doing with them as well. All they really did, I'm not going to say all because I don't want to discredit what they did. They slowed some tempos down. They brought the songs to life a little bit, and used some of their magic that they had at the time and made it a little bit better. But I think a really, really cool way to end the night. We're about 4 minutes away from end of the show, and since we're on a Kiss note, one of the things I loved, and this is ending, we started with a really high note on David Lee Roth, and I'm going to end on a David Lee Roth note, and this is from the book, and I really love this. And I like I say, I love Kiss. This is no disrespect to Kiss at all, but it's just, it's one of those things where people have memories, and you pissed me off one time, I'm going to remember. And so Gene Simmons, he invites the guys to come to the studio, and basically at the time invites the three guys, Alex, Eddie, and Mike, to come record. And and David Lee Roth's a little uneasy about this because David Lee Roth's feeling that Gene just wants to steal the guys in Van Halen. So David Lee Roth shows up for the recording, and Gene's kind of like, okay, why is he here? Whatever, right?
Right.
So whatever. So, Dave's probably making a bit of a pressure on Gene, whatever, and it was a bit of pressure. Fast forward, Kiss is on a tour of Japan. They come back, they're playing the Forum, whatever, and says, "Hey, you guys want to come down and check out the show? We'll have tickets for you at will call." Gene Simmons has tickets at will call for Van Halen. All right, great. Mike, Eddie, Alex, David Lee Roth show up. Oh, here, Mr. Anthony, here you go, Mr. Van Halen. Mr. Van Halen, oh, I'm sorry, there's no tickets here for Mr. Roth. Oh, really? Dave's like, screw you, I'm going home. Fast forward a little to the future. Van Halen's now on the scene. It's tables have turned. 84, exactly. Hey, Gene, we're playing. Hey, Gene, how you doing? It's Dave talking to Gene Simmons. We're playing at the Forum here this week. You want to come down and see us? That's great. Gene being himself. Thanks. Yeah, hook me up. That's great. Gene goes to the ticket ticket window. Here for Mr. Simmons, please. Oh, I'm sorry, there's no tickets for you. Boom. No tickets for you.
Yeah, that was a story. That's a great story. That's a story. I want to give a shout out to Steve Rosen, the great journalist who wrote for Guitar World for years, has written books on Black Sabbath. I mean, this guy, to me, Steve Rosen is an absolute pioneer, and I have nothing but the utmost respect. And one of the things that Steve was nice enough to do was he let me utilize his interview that he did with Rudy.
Nice.
He did an interview with Rudy in the early 1984, 1985, and so Rudy's the one who tells that story. So, yeah, I mean, again, it's classic Dave, and I think it also captures the fact that there was some deep-seated, let's say, disagreements between Dave and Gene, and we could talk a whole nother half an hour about whether Gene really wanted to steal Eddie and Alex or not, but there was no question that Dave kind of got the final laugh about that. Yes, I could all imagine Gene Simmons showing up at will call with whatever ladies on his arm or whatever, and finding out there were the show's sold out, and sorry, there's no tickets for you.
Exactly. All right, so I see one person here that's just reminding me of it. Blackie DH says, only guy without a book here. So I almost forgot about the trivia. All right, so I'm going to ask the trivia, and we're going to wrap up. The first person to get this answer right is going to win a personalized copy. So what's going to happen is when I say whoever the winner is here, I'm going to try my best to watch, and Poison Ivy, she's still watching, she'll help me as well. I want you to send me a quick message to info at evhgeardiscussion.com, or contact me through the Facebook page, however you can contact me, just contact me. Let me know that I've said that you've won, and I'll forward that to Greg. Give me your personal information, and Greg will send you an autographed copy. It's going to be one person.
Let me know exactly what you want me to write in the book.
Yep.
So that's what
I'll reach out to them, and I'll say, what would you like to say? Okay. So here's a question. All right, this is going to be the wrap up. Thank you everyone for watching. Thank you to the sponsors, the Music Zoo, Van Halen Store, and a big thank you to Rode today. I saw some comments in the chat, people saying they like the sound of my microphone and all the stuff today. I'm just learning it. So, time capsule. Okay, what was Greg's answer to putting a certain piece of Van Halen in a time capsule to be discovered later on? And the answer, whoever the first person is, what that time capsule piece was, wins one copy. All right? All right, there we go. So we're going to wait for that, and then we're going to wrap it up. And I can't thank you guys and girls enough for tuning in. I had a phenomenal time with you.
Fun.
We'll just wait for the answer. The first person to answer Greg's time capsule, and I'm watching closely.
And there's go through listing all the records as fast as fast.
That's right. That's right. And there's about a 35-second delay, or about a 30-second delay from what I say to what they hear. So, okay, we're gonna keep watching for a second, and I'm gonna have Greg back on again too as a recap. And I really encourage everyone to look at the description down below, because the link is there to the Van Halen store. Buy it from the Van Halen store and support them. Great show. The Warner Brothers demo tapes. Carlo Santin. Okay, Rockbiter was second, but Carlo Santin got it. The Warner demo tapes. All right, fantastic. Rockbiter, I love you, buddy. You were so very close. There you go. You guys were all really close. We're all coming in. So Carlos Santin, send me an email to info@evhgeardiscussion.com. I'm just going to write that down right now as well, too. And trust me, Rockbiter, I love you.
I'm only laughing because we've had problems with our Wi-Fi in our house, and so I'm just imagining, like the Wi-Fi is buffering. You're like, no!
I know.
You said it like 5 minutes ago, and someone else beat you to it immediately, so I feel your pain. But
they're all coming through right now.
Appreciate that. Awesome, guys.
I promise, guys, I'm going to try to pick up a few extra. I'm going to buy a few copies from Greg as well, too, and give some away as some prizes down the road. But I'm also going to be giving a lot of prizes away this year as well. Once this guitar contest is over, I got a lot of other things I'm going to give away, too. So if you didn't win tonight, please don't get discouraged. I'm the person who wins the least things in life, too. I enter all these contests. The only thing I've ever won in my life, I was on the Bozo the Clown TV show as a kid, and I won a lifetime supply of toys, which has lasted about 2 years. So I don't win too much either. So I feel your pain, but I promise I'll keep trying contests again and again and again, and I'll get you some prizes, I promise. So Carlos Santin, congratulations. This book, I'm going to show it one more time, and I'm just going to switch to my camera for a second because I want everyone to see this book in full glory. Buy this book, Van Halen Rising. It's the best thing you'll ever read when it comes to rock bands, especially Van Halen. You love Van Halen, you'll love it. I can't say enough about it. Even my 11-year-old son, Bane, rocks. Eric Jr. loves it, and if 11-year-old kid loves it. We have to fast forward past some of the nudity in the book, but other than that,
no pictures.
No pictures. Just description. Just description. So everyone, I'm going to let you go. Greg, hang on. I'll say goodbye to you off the air. I didn't get to everyone's questions over here as well, too, but thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Thank you for supporting EVH Gear TV.
Thank you, guys. It was really great. Really great. I really enjoyed it. It was really fun. I'd love to do it again sometime. Thank you.
Awesome. Rock and roll. Have a fantastic weekend. And Greg, I don't know how much you watch the show, but I always try to say that my goal is to be the warm-up band for the weekend. So this show is a warm-up band for the weekend. I hope you guys have a blessed weekend. The weather's getting nice here, even in Canada, so spend some time with your families. Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to all the rock and roll moms. Happy Mother's Day to Poison Ivy. Happy Mother's Day to everyone out there. Have a great one, and spoil them rotten. Everyone, have a great one. I'm going to turn it over to the little man. He's going to tell us what he's playing and what his name is, and we're going to take it out of here. See you soon. Cheers.
My name is Eric, and I'm playing left-hand guitar.
Video production services provided by Design39 Media. Visit design39media.com for all your website, photography, and video production needs.